Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into Frank Dikötter's The Age of Openness, China Before Mao.
Okay.
It's a book that offers a fascinating and often surprising look at China. Between the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911 and the communist victory in 1949. It's a period that's often kind of overshadowed by those dramatic narratives of revolution.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, instead of just focusing on the chaos and disintegration, the stuff that's commonly associated with this era, Dikötter actually argues that it was a time marked by, get this, a significant degree of openness.
Really?
Yeah. And not just in one area, but across many facets of Chinese life.
Huh.
So our deep dive today will unpack these key themes, right? These things that really characterize China during these decades. And we're talking about surprising levels of openness, like I said, in governance, in how people moved around, in intellectual life, and even in the markets.
Yeah.
Really challenges that, that ingrained perception of a country just falling apart. And it's important to remember that the book considers the entire period from 1911 right up to 1949, giving us, like a holistic view, not just snapshots. You know what I mean?
Right. So just to give everyone a quick overview before we delve deeper, Dikötter highlights this, and this is key, surprising degree of continuity and development in governance,
Right.
including things like the growth of participatory politics and also legal reform. We'll also explore this increasing freedom of movement both in and out of China. This is what led to those, really cosmopolitan lifestyles and significant foreign engagement at that time. Then we'll look at the vibrant intellectual and cultural scene, right? Marked by openness to global ideas and artistic innovation. And finally, the significant economic growth and integration into the global market, really, driven by trade and technological transfer. I'm kind of excited to jump into this.
Yeah, me too.
Let's start with governance. It might seem a bit counterintuitive, given how we traditionally view this period as a time with a weak central government. But Dikötter actually argues that there was considerable continuity in political vision and administration. Even the people involved remained pretty consistent.
Right. That's a key point. While there was certainly political upheaval going on, the underlying structures and many of the individuals within them, they actually persisted. And what's really fascinating is the growth of participatory politics during this time.
Yeah.
Dikötter points out that the electorate in China, you won't believe this, it grew to a massive 40 million people.
Wow.
As early as 1912.
That early.
Yeah. And by 1947, China even had a fully democratic constitution. So what he's really highlighting here is that despite all that political fragmentation, there were these significant underlying trends towards greater political participation. And, that's a key insight that really pushes back against this whole narrative of complete societal breakdown.
It wasn't just about these top-down electoral processes, though, was it?
No.
The book also emphasizes this proliferation of independent associations and organizations, things like chambers of commerce, for example. This really speaks to a society with a degree of self-organization and civic engagement outside of, direct government control.
And the legal reforms were also another fascinating aspect of this period.
Yeah.
Dikötter talks about how there were these sustained efforts at legal codification.
What's that?
Basically, it's the process of organizing and writing down laws in a systematic way.
Okay.
And there was this growing body of legal expertise during this time. Of course, the book doesn't ignore those contemporary criticisms about judicial independence, which were even openly discussed at the time. But the very push for reform indicates this move towards a more open and modern legal framework.
So then what's fascinating here, I guess, is how these efforts at legal reform, including prison reform, they kind of continued across all these different levels of government, even with the political fragmentation.
Exactly. So the new policies initiated by the king.
After the, what was it?
After the Boxer Rebellion. That was this anti-foreign uprising at the turn of the 20th century.
Right.
They actually laid a lot of the groundwork for this whole state building, including the establishment of things like the Ministry of Justice and its Bureau for Prisons. Different levels of administration actually did interact within that framework.
It's almost as if this machinery of state building, it almost had a momentum of its own, chugging along despite all that political turbulence at the top.
Yeah.
And speaking of regional dynamics, the book also touches upon this federalist movement.
Right.
And the drafting of these democratic provincial constitutions in places like Hunan, Zhejiang, and Sichuan. And these weren't just abstract ideas,
No.
They had concrete details. They included details about suffrage, sometimes even proposing universal suffrage, although they often had literacy requirements,
Right.
which I guess raises an important question, about the diversity of political thought at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Dikötter makes it clear that there was this liberal opposition that was advocating for human rights and democratic institutions. And this was a current of thought that was distinct from the more, I guess, revolutionary ideologies that tend to dominate, the historical accounts.
And the vibrant press of the era was, really crucial in fostering this diversity of thought.
It was.
Yeah. So imagine this. Over 1,000 dailies, weeklies, and monthlies circulating after 1911.
Wow.
Many of these were actually published in the, relative safety of the treaty ports.
What were those again?
Oh, those were those port cities in China where foreign powers held special privileges and kind of had a degree of control.
Okay.
And so this allowed for a degree of freedom of expression. You had publications like Zhu Rong's The Revolutionary Army and Chen Duxi's New Youth. They're well known. But they were part of this much larger ecosystem of voices. It's interesting because even after deliberative assemblies were suppressed, corporate associations, they actually provided this space for public debate and local politics to continue.
Oh, wow.
And the example of factory workers in Shanghai being avid newspaper readers, it really brings this whole thing to life. It shows you that you had ordinary people engaging with political ideas.
That's really cool. It highlights how political integration and participation, it wasn't just, those top-down processes.
Exactly. And the increase in independent organizations, from those powerful chambers of commerce to even, informal beggar unions, it just shows a society where people were actively organizing and engaging outside of direct government control. Dikötter argues that never before, never after were there so many voluntary organizations operating outside the realm of the state.
So I guess we've seen how this period exhibited a surprising degree of political and legal openness. Now, let's maybe explore how this sense of movement and connection extended beyond just ideas and structures to the actual movement of people.
Right.
And I guess the traditional view might be that only a select few traveled abroad during this time. But Dikötter really paints a very different picture, doesn't he?
Absolutely. The abolition of immigration restrictions in 1893, that really opened the floodgates, leading to, significant emigration. By 1911, there were at least 10 million Chinese immigrants living abroad.
Wow, 10 million.
Yeah. And this wasn't just some small trickle of people, It was a substantial movement of people. And these overseas Chinese, as they came to be known, they were incredibly diverse. Think about someone like Wu Liante, born in Penang, educated at Cambridge, and then he became a leading figure in public health in China.
Oh, wow.
Or Lim Boon King, a third-generation Straits Chinese who became the president of Xiamen University. Their identities and global connections were complex and varied.
That's a crucial point, I think, because the term overseas Chinese, sometimes it can mask this incredible diversity.
Yeah.
You even had individuals like Song Shang, a fourth-generation Singaporean who, despite his Chinese heritage, remained deeply attached to the British Empire and quite detached from China, actually.
Yeah.
So these examples really highlight those different ways that people with Chinese ancestry actually connected with the world.
Right.
And then you have figures like Tan Kaki, this guy, he was a migrant to Singapore, he made a fortune, and then poured significant resources back into his native Xiamen. He even founded the University of Xiamen. It just shows these strong ties that many immigrants maintained with their homeland, even while establishing new lives abroad.
It's interesting because there was also this return migration.
Right.
And, the cosmopolitan lifestyles that some people developed.
Yeah.
Immigrants returning with, those foreign salaries, they often built these semi-foreign houses, bringing back, new architectural styles and cultural influences. Chen Da's sociological survey from back then, it really highlighted these changes in villages.
Wow.
And it wasn't just about people leaving China. The migration flows between Hong Kong and the mainland, get this, they actually reversed for a significant period between 1893 and 1949, with many actually seeking refuge in Hong Kong before then.
Wow.
You also had influential figures like Ning Choi, who was educated in English in Hong Kong, actually playing key roles in China. And this really underscores the influence of those with bilingual and bicultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
British subjects educated in Hong Kong, including someone as prominent as Sir Robert Ho Tung, they played a role. And even the early modern government schools in China, they actively recruited students from Hong Kong's Anglo-Chinese schools.
And this engagement with the West, it wasn't limited to those who had lived abroad, was it?
No, not at all.
Dikötter gives examples of Chinese intellectuals who were fluent in English and actively engaged with Western thought and culture.
Right.
That corporate lawyer, Paul D. Cravath, he even noted in the 1930s how many of the people he met in Nanjing, they seemed so similar in their speech and thought to their Western counterparts.
Yeah.
And Lin Yutang, of course, became this hugely successful writer in English. He was even dubbed, the Emerson of China. And we can't forget those influential English language publications like China Critic and Tianxia Monthly.
Yeah, they were good.
They had a really cosmopolitan mix of contributors, both Chinese and foreign. And these platforms facilitated a genuine exchange of ideas.
Definitely.
And then there's the education of women abroad, another important aspect. Figures like Kang Cheng, you might know her as Ida Khan, and Xi Meiyu, also known as Mary Stone.
Yeah.
They became doctors after studying in the U.S., and then they returned to China to establish a hospital in Zhejiang.
Right.
So they made significant contributions to healthcare in China.
And if we connect this back to our central theme, I mean, the unprecedented openness of borders between 1911 and 1949, that's really striking.
It is.
The foreign population in China, it significantly increased after the fall of the empire, with large communities of Japanese, Russians, British, Americans, and French.
Wow.
And these foreign communities, they weren't just like isolated enclaves either. Their concessions and settlements, they actually played a significant role in urban infrastructure development and also the transfer of technology and knowledge.
Oh, wow.
Dikötter even mentions that most successful local enterprises, they were actually established in these foreign concessions. What's interesting is how the transfer of technology wasn't always straightforward.
Right.
He uses this example of unsuccessful soybean processing technology transfer. It happened before 1895, and it was due to local resistance.
Okay.
It shows that openness also involved, a willingness to adopt new ideas. And this actually changed after the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which concluded the First Sino-Japanese War and imposed significant concessions on China.
And even foreigners held these key positions in government branches, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like the Maritime Customs Service, the Post Office, the SALT administration.
Yeah, they contributed to administrative probity and skill transfer. Robert Hart's long tenure at the Maritime Customs, that's a prime example.
It wasn't just about these official roles either, was it?
No, not at all.
Dikötter shares these anecdotes of long-term foreign residents who developed these deep ties with China, like Jean Bazille and Madeleine. And he highlights how many foreigners who are, buried in treaty port cemeteries, they truly understood the country. Figures like John C. Ferguson, they had incredibly long and involved careers in China.
Yeah.
And you had people like Carl Crow and Ida Pruitt who spoke Chinese from infancy.
Wow.
They grew up in China. And Perlbeck even described growing up in, she called it, a double world, highlighting those intimate connections that some foreigners had. The presence of European refugees in Republican China further underscores this openness.
Right.
As does the fact that prominent Western intellectuals like William Empson considered China an important place to be.
And we can't overlook the extensive missionary presence.
Oh, yeah.
And their contributions to education, medicine, social reform, including the founding of institutions like Ginling College and the West China Union University. It's interesting to note that many missionaries actually welcomed the New Republic.
They did.
Yeah, and the financial contributions from mission boards and the Rockefeller Foundation to education and healthcare, they were also substantial. And the example of the 1920-21 Northwest famine relief efforts, it involved international organizations, and it really shows the extent of international engagement and the relative effectiveness of those relief efforts compared to like earlier imperial famines and the later Great Famine. So, this increase in the flow of people, as we've been discussing, it also naturally fueled the intellectual dynamism and the exchange of ideas, which we'll kind of touch on next. Dikötter opens this section with this wonderful anecdote about Xing Shengqian discovering Lin Fengmin's translated study on global art from 1935.
Oh, wow.
It really highlights Shanghai's deep engagement with the global art scene.
What's so striking about that story is that Lin Fengmin wasn't this isolated figure.
Right, exactly.
Dikötter emphasizes that there were tens of thousands of intellectuals who were actively engaging with global knowledge during this period. The very existence of the catalog of books published in the Republican era, it lists over 100,000 titles across all fields of knowledge. That gives you a sense of this vast intellectual output, right?
Yeah.
And as the book points out, most of these publications adopted a global frame of reference.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about the quantity of publications. The quality of academic work was also significant. You had independent sociology departments conducting path-breaking studies, like Sidney Gamble's work on Peking.
Right.
And John L. Buck's, comprehensive study of land utilization.
Wow.
And Chinese scholars were also achieving international recognition in science. Think about those Nobel laureates Song Dao Li and Chen Ningyang and Qin Wu, whose contributions to physics were groundbreaking.
And periodicals like the Eastern Miscellany and The Critic, they played a crucial role in disseminating global knowledge to wider audiences. And even those specialized journals like The Farmer, they brought international agricultural information to rural communities.
That's so cool. And the role of those modern schools in introducing students to global figures and ideas, that can't be overstated.
It can't.
Dikötter shares these anecdotes of even schools in small villages. Like they had modern maps and they were providing instruction in English. The establishment of these modern schools, even with limited resources after the Boxer Rebellion, it really shows this widespread desire for modern knowledge.
Absolutely. And this period also saw a flourishing of religious diversity. Conversions became more visible across different social classes.
Really?
Yeah. And you had those prominent politicians like Lu Zhengqiang and C.T. Wang with Christian backgrounds.
Oh, wow.
Interestingly, there was also the emergence of autonomous Christian theology and independent churches, like the Church Self-Government Society and the Church of Christ in China, indicating this move towards local agency in religious expression.
And it wasn't just Christianity, though, right?
No.
Buddhism also experienced this striking revival, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. With figures like Yang Wenwei and Tai Su actively working to modernize and internationalize Buddhist thought.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And even Islam saw some pretty radical changes.
It did.
Yeah, with the first published translations of the Quran.
Wow.
And increased engagement with the Middle East. Wang Huran and the China Muslim Mutual Progress Association played a significant role there. What's particularly noteworthy are those instances of interfaith dialogue. Like the Buddhist monk Taixu. He called for the propagation of Christianity in China and Buddhism in Europe.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it really speaks to this climate of intellectual openness and exchange.
And beyond those, formal academic and religious spheres, literature and the arts flourished, didn't they?
They did.
While the May 4th movement is often highlighted.
Right.
That significant cultural and intellectual movement.
Well,
Dikötter emphasizes that this was a broader phenomenon. He mentions this rediscovery of writers like Eileen Chang, who, wrote with great flair about the cosmopolitan worlds of Shanghai and Hong Kong before 1949.
Yeah, and the reciprocal interest between Chinese and international artists in the 1930s is also significant, with Chinese artists exhibiting their work in Europe. And you can't forget that vibrant film industry in Shanghai and Hong Kong. It had an international reach.
It did.
Yeah, with figures like Moonquan Mancheng and Zhou Chu Shu Sum, they brought in influences from abroad. Colonial Hong Kong's later success in cinema, that owes a lot to this earlier period. And photography is another fascinating area, often overlooked. Dikötter highlights Lang Jingshan. He was this preeminent photographer who gained international recognition all before the communist takeover. His unique integration of photography with traditional art forms like painting and calligraphy, it's remarkable. And the fact that nude photography existed and was openly explored before 1949, that really challenges later narratives about artistic restrictions.
Wow.
Figures like Pan Dowai experimented with nude models, and international nude photography also circulated.
That's wild. Popular music also boomed in those international concessions, didn't it?
It did.
From classical music, with figures like Mario Paci leading the Shanghai Symphony Orchestra and visits from Rachmaninoff and Chrysler to the vibrant jazz scene in Shanghai. The composer Alexander Cherepnine. His positive experiences in China and his influence on young Chinese composers like Chao Wencheng, that's a testament to this musical openness. And the development of these unique local jazz forms in Shanghai, with musicians like Bud Clayton noting that strong appreciation for jazz. It's a fascinating but often forgotten part of China's musical history.
It is.
It's a tragedy that many of those Republican-era recordings, they've been lost.
Yeah.
So finally, let's delve into open markets and economic growth. Dikötter discusses this, significant transformation of material culture with the introduction of this whole range of new goods. And the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, that was a key turning point. because it allowed foreigners to build factories and manage workshops, which significantly contributed to economic openness. And local merchants, they were remarkably quick to adopt modern technology after this point. And private investments, they increased as well. The introduction of company law in 1904 marked this shift towards trade as a right rather than a privilege, further opening up the economy. And China's participation in international conventions aimed at simplifying customs formalities, it shows this commitment to global commerce.
And contrary to, this whole idea of economic regression, Dikötter actually presents evidence of sustained economic growth before 1949.
Really?
Yeah, particularly in output per head until around 1930, driven largely by foreign trade. He mentions this commercial revolution of the late 19th century, where local and foreign entrepreneurs were collaborating.
That's really cool.
The growth in the value of recorded foreign trade is tracked by the maritime customs. That's a clear indicator of this economic expansion.
Yeah.
And foreign trade stimulated competition. It introduced new technologies, and it catalyzed local enterprises. The foreign concessions, they served as these crucial training grounds for workers, managers, entrepreneurs. And local industries like cotton textiles saw significant growth, even starting to export manufactured goods. Data on per capita GDP and modern industrial production between 1912 and 1933, they support this whole picture of economic advancement. Innovations in money and finance, such as the establishment of modern banks and those post-1935 currency reforms, they also played a vital role. And John L. Buck's research challenged that whole notion of vast inequalities in land ownership.
While acknowledging the economic slump of the early 1930s, following the Great Depression, Dikötter points to Stephen L. Morgan's height data as another indicator of sustained nutritional improvement for most people until that period. It's important to note that foreign modernities, material goods, and technologies weren't just for the elite. They were often copied locally and made widely available. The nationalist movement of import substitution further encouraged this. The free flow of goods, technologies, and knowledge also had a significant impact on housing and food culture. With new construction materials, architectural styles, and a wider variety of foods becoming accessible, you had vibrant markets, even in rural areas, offering a diverse range of goods. Developments in transportation were also, revolutionary.
Oh.
Despite the political instability, the Ministry of Communications actually worked effectively. And the 1920s saw this, enthusiastic road building. The rapid growth of bus services connected the interior and integrated local economies. The railway network that also expanded, built, and managed by local experts. And China enthusiastically embraced aeronautics, with early airmail and passenger services. Air travel even became surprisingly affordable.
Really?
Yeah. Ultimately, the revolution in transportation allowed people to move faster, further, and cheaper than ever before, fostering greater integration and connection to the world.
So to bring it all together,
Yeah.
Dikötter's central argument throughout the Age of Openness, it's that the period before Mao, it was fundamentally characterized by this significant degree of openness across governance, borders, minds, and markets, which really challenges that conventional narrative of it being solely an era of chaos and collapse. There's this one particularly striking passage in the book.
What's it say?
It describes Shanghai in the 1930s as a place where ideas, goods, and people flowed in and out with unprecedented freedom, which really encapsulates this central theme.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, the closure that China experienced under Mao, if that might be better understood as an exception rather than the norm in China's modern history.
That raises kind of a provocative final thought. For our listeners, could the last 2 or 3 centuries of China's history be more accurately seen as this growing engagement with the world, a continuous intensification of, global connectivity? Rather than just an inevitable march towards revolution. And as Dikötter suggests, that cosmopolitan experience of the Republican era, it actually holds significant relevance for understanding China's current engagement with globalization in the 21st century.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Age of Openness. See you next time.